Okay, in this video, we are going to be approximating square roots. I went ahead and I wrote out the perfect squares for you. Okay, I would suggest that you have this perfect squares list in front of you at all times when you're trying to approximate. And again, just so we're not confused, the numbers that I have circled in purple, those are your perfect squares. All right, so when taking the square root of any number that's not a perfect square, you will get an irrational number. So for instance, the square root of 5. 5 is not on this list, right? 5 is not in this list of numbers here. So if I take the square root of 5, which is not a perfect square, all right, so here's my calculator. If I do the square root of 5, you will see I get an irrational number, or a number that can't be turned into a fraction, right? So now we're going to approximate. Because we're going to be working with irrational numbers, it is just easier to approximate them and then do our operations from there. So number one, we have approximate the square root of 74. So first we need to ask ourselves, step one, it says identify what two perfect squares this is in between. All right, so 74 is in between 64 and 81. All right, so we have the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. All right, the square root of 64 is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9. So step 2, where it says identify what whole numbers this is in between, we know that it's in between 8 and 9. So we know that the square root of 74 is going to be about 8 point something. We don't know what that something is going to be. We have to figure out now, is it going to be closer to the 8 or the 9 on a number line? All right, so in other words, what we just did was square root of 74, it's an irrational number. So the two perfect squares, it's in between 64 and 81. If you take a number line, right, you have 8 and 9. The square root of 64 is 8, the square root of 81 is 9. Now we're trying to think about, okay, is our point closer to 8 or closer to 9? Okay, let's ask ourselves, how many spaces away is 74 from 64? 10, right? 74 is 10 spaces away from 64. 74 is how many spaces away from 81? 7 spaces away from 81. So which perfect square is it closest to? Is it closer to the 64 or the 81? In this case, it's closer to the 81. So our point would be somewhere here, closer to the 81. So I would say that the square root of 74 is about 8.7. You could say 8.6, you could say 8.8. I probably wouldn't go any further than that. As long as it is closer to the 9 than the 8. All right, and it's all estimating and approximating, so any one of those answers that I had said would be correct. All right, let's look at example 2. We're going to approximate the square root of 22. So step 1, which I have the steps there, is to, actually, I'm going to bring back the perfect squares list there. All right, sorry about that. So we're going to approximate the square root of 22. So 22 is somewhere between 16 and 25, right? So this is where we would have 22. So the square root of 22 is between the square root of 16 and the square root of 25. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 25 is 5. All right, and now let's ask ourselves, well, how many spaces away is 22 from 16? Right, so 22 is 6 spaces away from 16. And 22 is 3 spaces, not 2, 3 spaces away from 25. All right, so it's a no-brainer just looking at this. 22 is way closer to 25 than it is to 16. All right, so our point when we plot this is going to be closer to the square root of 25, much closer. So I would say this is about 4.7. You could say 4.8. Anything like that would be good. 4.9, I probably wouldn't go any further than that, lower or higher. All right, next we have approximate 100 and the square root of 103. All right, well, 103 is between 100 and 121, right? So we're going to take the square root of 100, take the square root of 121. Square root of 100 is 10, square root of 121 is 11. We are closer to the 10 than the 11, much closer, because 103 is way closer to 100 than it is to 121. So that would be somewhere right over here, very close. And I would approximate this to be about 10.1 or 10.2. 10.3 would probably be the farthest away I would go. I probably wouldn't go any further than that. If you're still confused, well, how do you know to plot the point there? Again, 103 is way closer to 100 than it is to 121. All right. Now for the you tries, I want you to pause the video and try to do this on your own. And actually, I want my perfect squares to come back here, so. All right, so by now you should have paused it and you should have tried this on your own. So the square root of 84 is between 81 and 100. Right, so square root of 81, square root of 100. Square root of 81 is 9, the square root of 100 is 10. So we know that this number, the square root of 84, is going to fall somewhere between 9 and 10. Okay, 84 is much, much closer to 81 than it is to 100. So my point would be somewhere maybe over here. All right, and that would be about 9.1 or 9.2. I wouldn't go past 9.3 as your approximation. That would be a little too far. So because 84 is so much closer to 81 than it is to 100. All right, next we have approximate the square root of 12. So here we have square root of, whoops, not 12, but square root of 12 would fall between 9 and 16. So we're going to do square root of 9, square root of 16. 9, square root of 9 is 3, the square root of 16 is 4. So the square root of 12 is going to be, is it closer to the 9 or closer to the 16? Let's think about this. 12 is 3 spaces away from 9. And 12 is 4 spaces away from 16. So really, since it's 3 spaces away from 9, it would be closer to the 9 than it would be the 16, but not by much, right? We have a 3 and 4 here. If this was 3 and 3, it would be a 0.5. Your answer would be 3.5. But it's 3 and 4, so it's still close to the middle, but not directly in the middle. All right, so since it's 3 spaces away from 9, it'll be closer to the 9, or the square root of 9, I should say. So it'll be somewhere there, close to the middle, a little bit off to the side where the square root of 9 is, though. All right, so I would approximate this to be about 3.4 because it's a little bit, it's not exactly halfway because we don't have 3 and 3 spaces, right? But it is pretty close to the halfway. All right, so that's it. I hope you learned how to approximate square roots. Thank you for watching.